Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Prose and Cons, a podcast by emerging writers for emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. And there are people sleeping right now, so I'm going to be speaking in ASMR mode. And today, we're going to be speaking about AI. For those that don't know, that stands for artificial intelligence. And we're going yes, some people, you never know.
You never know.
The big elephant in the room in a lot of industries right now. We're going to be looking at the elephant and talking about the elephant and how big its ears are and all those great details.
Mm-hmm.
And today I'm joined by Paddy Boylan.
Hi, I am Paddy Boylan. I'm a technical writer, editor, creative writing teacher, and sometimes I find the time to write fiction.
That's right. And we got Burnham.
Hello, I'm Ali. I was super impressed by your intro, Paddy. You did that so smoothly.
Oh, thank you. I've been racking them up lately, so you get into habit.
Oh, very good.
Mm.
I am a screenwriter. I also write in prose. I'm a full-time creative producer. What that means is I help program creative writing classes and opportunities for emerging writers is my day job. So I'm always in and amongst it.
Is that what
and
you
hosting, writing. Yeah, that's what I actually
right, okay.
do. That's my words job. And hosting workshops. I'm hosting a NaNoWriMo workshop in just before November, which is a lot of fun to get people inspired in writing. And relevant to today, I am appearing at a panel at Sydney South by Southwest, and the actual topic of that panel, so you get like a sneak peek of the talking points today, is AI and how technology is shaping storytelling. So I'm excited to give the for those who can't make Sydney South by Southwest, this is like a mini podcast version today. Isn't that exciting?
Yes.
Ooh. It is. And I'm in Phoenix. I'm a freelance editor, prorated editor on Fiverr, as well as founder of Bent Light Writing, which is it's a collective of copy editors, developmental editors, all that, as well as authenticity readers who read works to make sure that they're representing well different groups of people from different experiences and different backgrounds. As well as I'm an agented children's book author, and that's about it. Got nominated for a Aurealis Award. That happened too. Onto this elephant. So Chatbot GBT released an early demo on November 30th, 2022, and is now basically an entity out in the world, is more or less a household name. As kind of at least in my world, it's like if someone told me to name an AI generator, an AI tool, Chatbot GBT is the one that comes to name. But obviously there are a whole bunch out there right now. ClickUp, Jasper, Grammarly Go, those are a few that I found when I started Googling them. But they're all over, and there are tools for a plethora of different things, from like large scale data analysis, and then obviously some of the ones that have been creating some splashes. And you know what, I'm going to say that with a grain of salt, because they might just be splashes for me because it's my industry. But in the creative world, in terms of generating creative content, both in a visual medium like image generation, as well as video generation and text generation. And that's mostly what we're going to be focusing on today. Yeah, what does this actually mean? What does it feel like? How are people in specifically the writing industry responding to this? What does it look like in the editing world? What does it look like in submission world, publishing world? What is it presently doing? And that's what we're going to jump into. So I'll throw it over to you guys. I don't know, what are your first impressions? We'll start with that, of what's kind of going on with AI today?
Sure.
Where have you bumped up against it or presently embraced it? Whatever it is.
No, that's a good way to pitch it. Where have we come across it so far? So
Mm.
I, with the panel I'm hosting, the reason I'm part of that space is because of my work on Metropius. And Metropius is in an interesting space because they were already experimenting with kind of the animation side of things, leaning into real-time gaming. And AI is a very interesting tool in where that's going. So I'm just a fly on the wall writer who's kind of watching that space as the writer on the team as they're thinking about how can we create a user-led experience in game. If the AI is the tool, we help generate real-time content. An example of that is, so say you're playing a big sandbox video game. At the moment, there is some writer that they would have chained to like the bottom desk in the basement who comes up with lines and lines and lines and lines of just little bits of dialogue to feed into all the NPCs that you might bump into throughout the game, just to try and make it feel like a big open world experience. But if anyone's ever played one of those sandbox games, that big open world experience does fall down when the dialogue starts to feel sameish. Eventually you start to hear the repeated interactions, and even after a while the models you bump into are clearly just like palette swaps after a while. So where the tech is going in terms of real-time AI generated content for like sandbox gaming is it opens up the idea of more variety. The dialogue would be written by an AI, so every interaction with an NPC is unique and would never be repeated, and even the model you're interacting with is a unique looking model that'll never be repeated,
and only occasionally says something really racist.
Yes. No, that's a really good point. I will pause to address that because I think that's really interesting now that we've dived into it. So I'm part of the Australian Writers Guild, and only about a week ago they released their formal like manifesto. Here's our paper addressing the Australian Writers Guild stance on it. And they're quite aware that the gaming is the more harder space to, for like a better word, like monitor, legislate, because it's just moving so fast, faster than it is in film and TV. And one of the things they're calling for is any game released to the public that has that AI generated content would automatically have an 18 plus R rating. To, as you just mentioned, Paddy, safeguard against we don't know what the robot's going to spit out in real time. And so the first thing that makes it less financially interesting, maybe for all the small companies that were going to jump on it straight away, because they would have seen it as a money-saving tool cost. But then they're like, oh, wait, but if we're putting out an R-rated game, we might not make back as many sales. So it becomes an economic question the moment these games are legislated to have an 18 plus rating. So I thought that was interesting. But I suppose my personal take on that is, at least for me, the most toxic and R-rated experience I've ever had in big gaming is usually when I've got a headset on and interacting with humans. And humans are usually the more wild part of gaming than any content I've bumped up against. And it is interesting, though, I would argue that the tool that might save us and be the moderator of those things is probably going to be an AI. You would train an AI to be the bot that moderates text, moderates out bad content. Like, I think we don't realize how much Facebook, Instagram, the company I'll keep calling Twitter and won't call anything else, uses AI already that saves us from the worst of humanity and the stuff that people would just be posting online. It's actually AI is what's already modding all that stuff out. So it's interesting that the guild put forward that the AI's got to generate awful stuff, but humans also generate awful stuff. And I thought that was just an interesting talking
What's
point that
funny-
the AI mods already save us from human content.
I feel like when AI does it, though, it seems more egregious. Self-driving cars, right? For a long time, we've been talking about like, but what happens when it hits a pedestrian? And obviously that's a problem. But people hit pedestrians a lot. I think there's talk about like an AI generated, no one knows for sure, but like an AI driven car is likely going to be a lot less likely to get into a collision. But when it happens, it's going to be front page of every single newspaper online article.
Yeah.
Whereas if it happens from human to human, that's fine.
Human
this
error.
isn't excusing
Yeah.
AI. Yeah, exactly. AI error seems more egregious. We hold it to a higher standard. That maybe we should.
It's because we're all waiting for it. We're all like looking for
Yeah.
it to happen because
Good point.
It's that nightmare that we've already created for ourselves. So we're kind of waiting for it to happen to prove to ourselves. We're kind of like, we have a bunch of post-apocalyptic material out there around AI. So we're all waiting for.
Or don't we?
We just want to point our fingers at it and be like, see, we told ourselves.
I think you've nailed it.
And I think there is that.
I think that's it.
I think there is that economic element as well, that the AI is product. If it's been sold, it's been purchased. And then if the thing we've bought harms us, that's just not good, both as a commercial strategy or as, I guess, something we want to live with. So we want to legislate and protect against that.
Google doesn't own all the drivers in a given city.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess that's a big part of it is like you said, it's an automatic R rating because we can't predict what it's going to say. It's a product that has an unknown element to it. So it's like, even though we hurt ourselves on products all the time, it's this fact of like, well, you didn't promise me, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of easy space to sue, for better lack of a words. Even if you're not suing, at least kind of have that mentality.
Where we've come across AI, what I think is interesting is we don't know where we've come across AI. We notice it when it's bad. We notice it when like the person drinking the cappuccino and laughing has 6 fingers, but we don't notice it all the other times. They're like kicking back and laughing and they've got like Satan's hands. Yeah, we don't know all the times it's good. And the whole idea is that it's indistinguishable from human creation. So, I mean, it seems to me like we're probably seeing it a lot more than we think, and we're just not noticing. I don't tend to read a lot of, I don't know what the word is, indie books and indie fiction, but I imagine that there's a lot of pieces out there that are mostly AI generated and edited by a human that if you're like really big in, say, the werewolf romance space and you're reading a lot of these things, you might not be able to tell. Granted, I don't read a lot of indie fiction, so I'm not sure. But so Ali and I were talking about this a little earlier. Have you guys heard, or Phoenix, have you heard that Amazon has recently put in a new rule that says that you can only upload 3 books a day now because of...
Oh my gosh.
I mean, already that's a huge number, but it's because they're being flooded by AI.
If you're just naturally writing 3 books a day, like, you've already got questions over the quality. That's an insane output.
Something's going on.
I love how they drew that as the bar, though.
I know. Only 3.
Amazon decides a human can write 3 books a day, but a computer writes 4 books a day.
It's very arbitrary.
That's going to affect everyone using AI and, what's his name? That one author that writes a ton.
Stephen King or Brandon Sanderson? They're both well known on the podcast.
Brandon Sanderson.
Anyway, the point is that Amazon is already being flooded with AI generated books, it seems, and this is only going to get more common.
Yeah.
A fun fact on that, just while we're talking about Amazon, is like it was already very interesting, the self-publishing stats. I remember, so I looked this up. So 1.4 million self-published books are published a year on Amazon.
Wow.
1.4 million.
Wow.
And I couldn't find the exact number for this, but I had read it before. But at one point, Amazon was distributing more books in a single year than had ever been published previously in human history. So just take a moment to let that sink in. So by its definition of published, In a year, it's generating more books than all of human timeline books published, and that's only growing exponentially.
It does make me wonder about the value of, I mean, kind of like the value of new content. Like, like, we're all writers, and so we want to release new books, but why not go to something that's being created in last year on Amazon if there's already like the entire history of human literature there? You know? I don't know. Screaming into the void.
Yeah.
A lot of it, I'm just going to say, a lot of it's not good. That's just flat out. I will just say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a stat that was out there before AI started flooding the market. So it has to be a huge push for Amazon to suddenly be like, oh God, that's too many books, because they were already publishing a lot of books. And that's a lot with a capital A, capital L.
That's where I've started to come across AI in my sort of day-to-day, or when I first started really becoming aware of it, was so I do work on Fiverr, and all of a sudden I started having people coming to me saying like, hey, do you do humanization of text? And I was like, ooh, what does that even mean?
Fascinating.
Yeah, there's a whole market on Fiverr now of just people that do fact checking is a thing now, which I refuse to do. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna fact check for you. And humanization, just making sure that it sounds human, because AI still has those little corners to it. Yeah, humanization of text. And it's this is gonna be one of the other questions I wanted to ask you too. This is one of the bummers for me. We've already touched it, but it is the flooding of the market. And I feel we're just gonna get these little factories that are just, you generate text, you pay someone to edit it, you pump it up on Amazon to varying states of quality, because at the end of the day, the people that are making a lot of money off of self-publishing books, most of them are doing it by quantity rather than quality. And it's just a matter of putting books out, putting content out. It doesn't matter what it is, or it matters what it is, but it doesn't matter how good it is to a certain degree. It's that return. You get a few sales for the thing you didn't put much time or money into, and you make some money off of it. So I feel like a big bit of the environment going forward is going to be that distinguishing factor that authors can get on their work to say, this is actually, it's a matter of us bringing the cream to the top, because there is going to be a lot of noise, even more so than before.
Also, I read about this recently, and I don't recall specifics, or grain of salt, but AI is going to get increasingly good at everything, but also faking human presences and reviews. So we've got this system now where algorithms are really good at, kind of scary. The whole indie self-pub movement is kind of based on word of mouth in inverted commas, because it's online word of mouth. But when that becomes faked by armies of AIs writing really sophisticated stuff, making profiles, it seems like indie publishing online the model could be under threat, right? Because you've got lots of people writing potential trash with AI potentially, and then lots of AI leaving false reviews saying like, this is the greatest piece of work since Melville. What happens? And maybe it's just going to mean like a big return to more traditional publishing, because you can't get that past like a publisher, right?
Yeah, so the interesting thing the Guild put forward in their words was this idea. So we've probably seen in the news how there's some authors suing because they've seen that their books have been used as feeders into the AI to train the AI how to spit words back. And so it is the Guild's putting forward that anything that is pumped out of an AI must automatically enter public domain, and therefore can't be monetized, because they can't trace the the legal chain of the author who has contractual ownership over this work, because it's been spat out of the feeder that's been a mismatch of all these different uncredited authors from thousands of different sources.
How do you prove it? How do you prove that a book's AI written?
So what they're at least doing on a commercial level, like on the indie level, I can see that being really hard. But I can speak to the commercial level, is transparency, that if an AI tool at any stage, either generation or editing, because I would like to split the hairs between those two things later in the conversation, but if it's used for either generative or editing, you must flag that an AI tool has been used. So extreme transparency, and therefore it's public domain, can't be monetized, and if it can't be a commercial product, that's what disincentivizes big businesses, corporations, the production houses from wanting to use AI, because if they're like, if we can't make money off this, we're just going to do it the old way and pay people to do it, because then we can copyright it and then we can make money off it. So that's what'll stop it happening. That'll stop it happening at the big levels. When contracts are involved. But what's stopping the indie author from, as both of you have pointed out, just they're like minimal time. Even if this takes me half an hour and I make $10 off this, then they're going to keep doing it and just monetizing that. So something I was talking to Paddy about, I think it's really interesting that gatekeeping, like we use, quotation marks, gatekeeping a little bit when we talk about the difference between indie and traditional publishing, that agents and publishers act as gatekeepers to authors getting their work out there, but that human relationship between the writer and the agent, I'm speculating if that might become more important than ever, that it's almost like a verify you're real. In Australia, we have a fairly healthy ecosystem of writers being able to approach publishers straight away, and not needing to go through an agent. But if publisher slush piles are just being flooded by AI generated manuscripts, and they don't have the manpower, they don't have the soft infrastructure, admin money to pay someone to go through that slush pile, they're just going to shut their doors, and they'll be like, we only take recommendations from agents, because we know an agent is a human, and the human and then the agent can verify that the writer is human. So I'm wondering if that two-step gatekeeping might be the solve to that unfortunate situation. I don't like it, but it might be what stops it.
It kind of reminds me of like how the scientific process works, right? I mean, people accuse like scientific academia of being like an ivory tower, but it's there to stop like an avalanche of crud. People writing papers on like, this thing that I just came up with is the greatest, and here's a study I did with 10 of my friends. And you want to gatekeep that because you need like a group of experts to say like, well, is it? Like, let's actually break this down. So I don't know, like, it seems kind of like, I think there's the natural tendency to think like, oh, gatekeeping, like we don't want that. But when the alternative is a lot of crud, like, what's the alternative?
The alternative I could think of is like, maybe we also start generating tools that are humanization tools, in the sense that they're designed to track human activity on a project, in the sense of like certain modifications of keyboard trackers or copy and paste trackers or things like that, to show like at the time of this document being generated, there was no outside content coming in. Everything that was here was written on the page itself or something. Oh,
that's interesting. So like using hardware to verify that a human created it.
A slower input into the document. That's really fascinating.
Before.
Just came to me right now.
There's going to be a whole...
You've solved it, Phoenix.
That's really... It's kind of fun futurism. There's going to be like, if that happens, like you can see an arms race of people breaking that, and then, like, how do we bypass that, and then how do we improve it? But I'm sure that's already happening.
Well, that's how those little capture tests already work, right? Like the just click the box. It's not tracking the click the box. It's tracking the squiggly mouse movement on your way to clicking the box. And it's your mouse movement across the page verifies you're a human with a jittery hand rather than a bot that just goes click.
I also heard
that sounds like the same thing.
I also heard that
Yeah.
finding all the motorcycles is actually there to train like AI recognition tools on like how to identify a motorcycle from like a 5-year-old in the background. We're all training the AI as we try and protect against the AI.
I was
So you're
once given
telling
one that
me-
was 6 tiles and it was the back of a bus. The whole picture was the back of a bus, and it's click all the tiles with a bus. And I'm like, all 6 tiles are a picture of a back of a bus. What do you want from
you
me?
win.
I'm like second
Easy.
guessing it.
Yeah. Is it messing with me?
So are you telling me all the time that I've proved I'm not a robot? I was just training a robot.
This is what I hear, but I mean,
Oh my gosh.
I know it's an Ouroboros. It's
Oh my
robots all the way down.
gosh.
But on a creative angle to this, thinking about agents and publishers, I'm interested in the idea of formula and formula storytelling. So, and especially in screenplay, formula is really important, and you are rewarded for writing to the formula because there are metrics that sell. Netflix literally tracks when people stop watching at a certain point if you haven't hit a certain turning point at a certain time.
Yeah.
Like there's data is informing formula and structure a little bit. And also to the point where there was this trend with writing your synopsis, submitting it to the agent, submitting it to the publisher, that your synopsis needs to sit in a very strict formula. And now I'm watching this trend with AI, and what AI will get really good at doing is the formula.
Yeah.
So I'm speculating, when I'm talking to emerging writers as my day job and they're talking about pitching to agents and publishers, I'm saying use your synopsis and now your cover letter to the agent to be as human as possible. Like I feel like we're about to enter an era where the weird quirky stuff that you can put and shape your synopsis and put in your cover letter will stand out and be rewarded against all the authors that may be using AI to just sharpen up their structure to meet what has been really strict structure tools and expectations to this point. And especially, this is kind of scary. An example that has been shown to me, I don't think it's open to the public yet, but it's this storytelling, they're calling it like a writer's aid. But what it does, there was literally a drop down menu where it's like pick your genre, and it was like romance, and then pick down what scale of romance. So you'd be like cozy, steamy, or like erotic. And then it's like plug in a few more keywords, and then it would like spit out the formula for you as a writer. And then it's like, cool, here's your beat sheet. Now write to this. And I'm like, that like it's interesting in I see why it's a really good beginner's writer's tool. And again, splitting hairs between this idea of generative and editing tools, that generative stuff and watching the formula come out of the machine, I think is really interesting from a beginner's point of view when you're learning the structures. But once you have your work, you have your structure, I feel like what's going to be interesting, what's going to sell, what's going to be rewarded might be the, okay, well, now that you know the rules, you break it. That old idiom of knowing the rules, then breaking it will be, I guess, where art and creativity will survive this, what's going to happen commercially in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
The reason earlier why I said like werewolf romance as my example is because I think genre writing could be really under threat. It's not true that all genre writing is formulaic, but there is certainly formulaic genre writing. And I know, like, let's say romance, like people love this stuff, and I don't think they necessarily need it to be the best of the genre to read it. It's like it scratches an itch. The scratching the itch is usually like a formulaic kind of thing, and they're okay with that. So if I was, say, a romance writer right now who made their money, let's say, writing like several romance books a year, and many of them do, I'd be really worried, because this is exactly what AI is. I mean, like you said, if like you can pick the genre, subgenre, keywords, that's exactly what AI is going to do. There's also, we're assuming now that AI can't do the weird creative stuff, and maybe now it can't. But I'm interested in what you guys think about the possibility of like what happens if AI gets to the point where it can do out of the box. It can do really interesting things that we didn't anticipate. And like, it's tempting to say, no, that's impossible, it can't happen. But I feel like for any layman to say that can't happen. I mean, AI is already like
foreshadowing.
Yeah, it's yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The author's smiling while we say that. So I don't know. What do you guys think about what happens if AI does get to the point where it's like, whoa, this is damn, this is good.
That's what I. So another thing I wanted to ask you guys was, for you two, like, what are you curious to see from AI? And this is one thing that I'm curious to see is, at the moment, like, you know, you put in a prompt and AI is creating something from pieces that already exist. So it's going to resemble the pieces that already exist at the moment. So what I'm curious to see is how different can it look from the pieces that already exist? Because at the end of the day, we're doing the same thing. We're creating things from pieces that don't exist. But it's there. To me, it feels like a degree in difference from like what we're creating versus the original content sometimes can be a very large logical jump, and that's where this like creative inspiration comes from. It's like this degree of a distance from the original material.
It's an interesting philosophical question, isn't it? Like,
so I'm curious to see how big of a logical jump and still be interesting AI is able to make. Yeah,
I'm happy to go first. I've got a little bit of a take on this, just from a few different angles. I love what you're saying, Phoenix, about the idea that is kind of what we do. We absorb art our entire lives. And when I did the creativity podcast, and it's a part of the classes I run when I talk about creativity and how the mind works when it's being creative, it is this sense of deorganization. So we observe patterns, we observe things, and then when we go away in rumination, we're not actually thinking about it, but the back of our mind does the disorganizing, and it'll rearrange the pieces in a new and interesting way. And then it comes to the forefront of our mind again, and that's when we have our aha moments where we're like, that's something I've never imagined before. I've never had that image before. I've never read that. I've never experienced that, but it's come from obviously our lived experience, disorganization, rearrange the pieces, then our brain gives it back to us. So that's what our lovely brain computers do. So I love positing, well, can a computer do that? And in theory, yes. I think in theory, yes, it will get to that part where we won't be able to see the 1 + 1 = 2 anymore of AI. Because it's such a baby at the moment, it's really easy for us to be like, you've taken that from that, you're using that, and that's how you got that. But the more it does it, we might not be able to see those the working. We might not be able to see the working anymore. It is interesting though that I think what will save us commercially from an AI that gets that good will be the law and the work that the guild is doing now. And it is interesting. This is the words they put out that they're going to stand by and fight for. Creativity and art are fundamentally and exclusively human endeavors. So they've hard line, that's what they're going to draw, that you can only pay a human for this. There is an interesting example they've done that, say if you're doing like indie theater and you get the chatbot to spit out random quotes and then you ask actors to perform those quotes and you actually put on like a bizarre interpretation piece and then you charge an audience tickets to come and see that. Yes, the director, the producers, the actors can all get paid for that, but it's that transparency that the script enters public domain and you say that an AI generated it, just a way of protecting it. And I guess it'll always still be a little bit iffy about, we don't know what was fed into that machine, so we can't credit the writers. Anyway, I've already harped on about that, but I think that's what will, at least from a commercial angle, because I think that we're all worried about it taking jobs at the moment. So it is that the commercial question. But yeah, the philosophical question of, can it actually get to that point? I think it probably will.
I think it can. And I think as I go through this, my assumption is always like, well, assume it can. Like, what are you going to, in the future, you're planning for yourself, just assume it can. And then what from there, like, let's say, can create on a level indistinguishable from a human creation.
Mhm.
It's just like, assume, okay, then what do we want our relationship to it to be from there? Is it just a matter of like, all right, everyone, like, because honestly, it can be really cool, it could be really useful, but everyone just needs to
Yes.
be cool about it. Like, don't exploit, which, you know, it's a big ask, unfortunately. You know, pay people well. Like, let's all still enjoy this. If AI is being super creative and creating really cool stories, that feels like a cool thing that we could have access to, a computer generating something it thinks is cool or whatever, if it thinks in that way. But
I can almost promise you there's going to be people listening to you saying that they're going to be very upset by that point of view. The idea that like we should embrace the idea of AI creation, because some people really, I'm not even saying wrongly, but some people really reject that. And like, what are you saying? Like, give no quarter. The idea that we should relinquish any human control of creativity to AI is, which
it's
I don't
just
know.
a
I'm not
matter.
saying they're wrong. It's another opinion, but
No, but I guess for me, I hear those voices, and I understand it's important because we're fighting for the economics of it now. So some hard lines need to be drawn if you're going to win that legislative argument. But I do fundamentally think it's also the definition of a conservative point of view to try and put it back in the box. And I guess I always like to think of myself as a progressive. Just not even labeling those as political parties, but are you a conservative? Are you a progressive? And trying to halt things as they are, resist it, put the robot back in the box. That feels conservative to me. So it's kind of like, it's here. What's the best way forwards? Another small anecdote I want to share is I read a really interesting article that a writer I was working with studied a man who made a theater show that used all these automatons. And it was basically just putting the robots on a stage and making them dance, and the study of why humans are so fascinated with the first thing we did when we had automatons was we wanted to see if they could replicate dancers. We wanted to see if they could replicate actors, and we're fascinated by that and what it can do. And so I'm wondering if this is just another era of make the robot dance. It is something we have always done with our technology. As soon as we have a new robot, we're like, put it on a stage, make the robot dance. So I think we're doing that. We're trying to work out its limitations. And it's okay to embrace the excitement we get from making the robot dance. But after a while, we have always realized it is a fad. Automatons have not replaced our actors. Not all our theater shows are automatons. So I think the robot may go back will find its place. And I hope that writers get to be the ones to decide how these AI tools are useful for us moving forward.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think one way things could go is like, you know how there's Etsy, and Etsy is a marketplace for craftspeople. You pay more for like a wooden carved duck rather than an IKEA duck, because something about the idea of the person sitting at home lovingly carving these ducks is intrinsically worth more to you. The moment you know it's mass produced by IKEA, it cheapens it. So that's a thing. But sometimes I wonder to what extent. So right now we've got like almost the revulsion of AI, not all this, but like AI generated art and AI generated creativity. What happens if a generation grows up in a world where AI generated creativity is the norm and they're awash with AI generated images? Like the first generation to grow up and just think like, of course that's generated by an AI. Like, why are you even asking that? Would it cease to matter to them? How much is the importance for us that these things are created by a human? How much of that is actually cultural? And if it is cultural and like there is a generation that lets go of that, well, that's interesting. Like the idea that our ancestors created things, but like we don't, that feels quaint and that feels backward. That feels pessimistic, but I don't know. That seems really plausible to me. And maybe there'll always be like the market for the Etsy. Like people want like, yeah, this is a book written by a person. Can you imagine sitting down and writing an entire book? That might be like the little corner of, the market.
I've thought of that too. So one thought that has been like a really interesting one for me is like in this topic of humanization of text.
Yeah,
The
it's an
humanization of
interesting
text
time.
comes from two angles, because there's one angle that we need to make the AI sound like a human. The other end is humans getting used to AI sounding things. And if that becomes what we adapt to, suddenly we meet on this middle ground where there's no whatever. That's possible as well.
Do you remember
Although
when
that's like
auto-tune?
that's a sci-fi projection. That's like
Yeah,
just
but when
some fun speculative thought.
do you guys remember when auto-tune came out? And then there are all these singers that started to sing like auto-tune, like because auto-tune became the norm and people became used to it. Like to go suddenly became like a stylistic thing. I think you've like I can totally see that happen. Like people
It's
writing
possible.
to sound like AI because like
Well,
oh yeah,
we're
that's the way
already
the internet
kinda
talks.
seeing this. So
Hmm.
I really don't like the TikTok trend of advertising books with tropes. Maybe you guys
Hmm.
have seen it where it's like
What is
enemies to lovers is really the popular one, or there's only one bed. And so they'll just put these headline tropes up and sell the book. So then what writers start doing, they're like, I'll just write a book to that formula because people are buying it just for the trope. If you're like, you want
Yeah,
an
yeah.
enemies to lovers, I will write an enemies to lovers without any more kind of creative thought than that. And someone put it into, I'm like, why am I butting up against this? Why don't I like this? Why am I being an old crotchety millennial? I needed to go and talk to a Gen
because
Z
it's
for them to point it
creatively-
out to me.
It's creatively cheap, even if it's like marketably
Yeah,
successful. It's kind of
but
artistically empty.
it is. And they highlighted for me that that's how they used to use the tags on fan fiction online, where if someone wrote a fanfic of something and then the tag they would use would be enemies to lovers, there's only one bed. And so kind of that fan fiction lingo has now broken through into how publishers, the big five publishing houses, are now advertising their books, and how writers are now writing their books, all started with these fan fiction tags. So that sounds like the same thing you were describing to before, Paddy, about the auto-tune. Is it's kind of like this, yeah, it is a technology came first, and then we've adjusted our culture and approach to the art based on that got popular. And that just kind of blew my mind a little bit, that I'm like, it's just fan fiction coming full circle, because now all the 13-year-olds 20 years ago are now the writers being published today.
You know, Karl Marx said all history is driven by changes in material circumstances. And I don't know, when we talk about stuff like this, like, yeah, maybe it's all material circumstances that changes things. This is certainly, I don't know, it's a brave new world, and it's whatever happens, it's going to be really, really interesting to see. Like the sci-fi nerd in me is like, this is going to get weird, you know?
Yeah.
Good or bad, it's
as a counter to the
weird.
AI, as a counter to the AI putting out good creativity or good writing, have you guys heard of the official word is model autograph? I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Model autophagy. No, that's not how you say it. Anyway, it stands
Autophagy?
for mad.
Oh, yeah.
Say it again.
Autophagy? I don't know.
Yes, yes, autophagy. Model autophagy disorder. There we go. Use that one in your edit. But it stands for MAD. Basically, it's this idea that there's only so much. Okay, so you feed into the AI machine to generate its inputs, and then the AI machine starts using its own outputs to feed back into itself, and starts to cannibalize itself until it just distills down into this slurry of nothing.
Yeah, cultural gruel.
Cultural gruel. So that's, a spicy take from Ali. That's what I think fan fiction is a little bit. But because it is this cannibalizing on the same source material down and down, down. And the idea of tropes, that's how we're using tropes. If we're advertising with those tropes, but then we write to those tropes, it's the distillation of creativity down to the bare bones. And this idea that AI images. We see it in the graphics that it's starting to use other AI generated graphics to create new AI graphics, and it's just gonna eat itself to death. And this will only exponentially get faster and faster this cycle unless they can put new originality fed into it to stop it eating itself to death. So that posits that the human's disorganization and pure creativity will be fundamentally important to the AI machine, not cannibalizing its own creativity to death. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. That's where I kind of landed on the point I was bringing up before around like that logical jump humans can make, that sort of inspiration that takes something that's like completely irrelevant seemingly and creating something that feels like more or less completely new, even if it is like it's this fine-grained blending down of information that gets built up into something that's like fully distinct, more or less. But you can argue it as a degree of a jump from where it came from. The thing that made me think about that was a while ago. An acquaintance of mine, I was telling them about my book idea, and they're like, "Oh, have you considered using AI for it?" I'm like, "I have not. I actually have zero interest in that. That feels just whatever."
Yeah.
He plugged without consent, but it went fine. But he plugged the basis that I had talked about into an AI tool and read back the synopsis. And I was so uninterested in the synopsis. I was like, I've heard that story before. My story is like so different from that. Like that's doing things that I've heard before. Mine is doing things I've never heard before. So it's this feeling of like, oh, at the end of the day, it could only create something new from large pieces it already had. And so it was that feeling of essential, like there's an essential piece that humans are still playing in this. And the thing that scares me, it's not even like fear, it's just kind of a bummer to me. The only thing that really gets me down about AI creation and like what I was saying before, if computers get really good at generating material and it's actually interesting to read, I'm okay with that. Like the thing that bums me out is the noise and the watering down. I don't want things to lose meaning. So it's like if people are just like, oh, we can make a book in 30 minutes, let's do it, and it's just like this sea of noise and meaninglessness, that's such a bummer to me. As well as like with AI generated images, it's like if it takes meaning out of because people are flooding the world with all these images that are computer generated, it starts to take meaning away from people that are actually harnessing this skill to create this image. And it's just, that's the thing that's a bummer to me. But I don't know. So
I was going to say, a position I found myself in the other day was actually advocating for the fact that writers like writing. And I didn't think that was a controversial take until I kind of had to say it out loud, because I think there's some producers and then some tech people who are making these tools who go, writing takes a really long time. We can make life really easy for them. We can save producers some money by speeding up the whole process by inventing these AI tools that help the generative process. And I think there's a lot of rhetoric around writers complaining about how hard writing is, how writing does take a long time, how it can be soul crushing. But then we have to be like, okay, we've been complaining for a long time, but we write and we do it the long way because we actually do like it and it's fun. I had a producer kind of hyping how exciting it'll be. He's like, you can use this tool, it'll speed things up. And I'm sitting there being like, oh, but I wanted to write the screenplay. Can I still do that bit? It was like a weird stance to be arguing from. So this is where I wanted to talk about, I think we've still got time, the difference between that's generative AI, the first draft, and they're already running into the legislation's coming for them that you can't use the tools on a first draft. It's going to be public domain. And then tools that are more the editing. And I can see AI tools actually being incredibly useful and potentially the future of AI tools in writing in the editing process. So letting writers still do the first draft, the generation, the thing that can be copyrighted, the thing that's new and exciting and breaks rules. But then we've already got things like Grammarly, you can argue, is an AI. Pro writing aid, even more so, because that'll suggest a whole sentence about how to reword a sentence if you've written kind of a funky sentence. So that's AI. And I think writers will want to use that. They want the help in the editing process, not the first draft process. You guys have similar instincts around that?
Yes
yeah,
and no.
the thing there's the area I've been thinking about, like where I could see something being fully replaced by AI eventually, is copy editing, where it's just grammar rules, full punctuation and grammar. Like it's like feed it into an AI, have it done in a few seconds. That makes sense to me. It's like, okay, I can let that one go. Like I could see that. At the moment, using Grammarly and things like that, like going through a manuscript, there are times where the thing that I feel that's interesting to me is there is an art to punctuation as well. Like there are times there are times where it's like, do you put a comma here or do you put a comma here? And the answer is actually both are correct.
It's a creative decision.
And it's a creative decision.
Yeah, there's not always a rule for stuff like that. It's you know, an AI can't teach you taste. An AI can't teach you.
There are times where it's like, do you use a dash or do you use a semicolon? I'm like, both are correct, but a dash is better here. Like it's
And that's why I say yes and no with the editing thing. Like on one level, like, yeah, there's only one correct spelling of a certain word in a certain like language. Unless you're going UK, US, but that's even then. But editing is also essentially creative. You know, I was actually thinking like, yeah, of course, AI to an extent is going to be able to replace a lot of copy editing, but you know, there's the comma issue. But also there is the issue of overall taste. So, I mean, Phoenix, you're an editor. Like when I was thinking about this whole topic today, I was thinking like, well, of all of us, maybe your profession is the most protected, because ultimately what AI generated content is always going to need is human oversight, is a human to look at it and say like, my human brain thinks this is good. My human brain thinks these changes should be made. Like an AI can't, presumably shouldn't, if you're a company or whatever that cares about the output of your stuff, you can't rely on the computer to be the final checker. You need the human to make sure it's the final checker, to make sure it hasn't said something insane and racist, or to make sure it hasn't put out gibberish. So hopefully we're always the final, if nothing else, like the final gatekeepers of what comes out of the machine. I wouldn't ever want to trust an AI all the way through for anything I put out.
At the moment, it's producing a spike of work for editors, because people do, at the moment as things are going, it's true, but you never know like what the next step's going to be. But
why do you want to say no to things like humanizing work and fact checking? Is it because, I mean, fact checking, I guess because you're encouraging like gross false information coming into the world, right?
Fact checking just has no interest to me. That's not my job. I don't want to do that for people. And as well as that's very disheartening to me. It's like, if you don't know the facts that you're writing down, my stance is, write the work, like do the work. Humanization, I don't have much of a problem with. For me, it's mostly just like, I'm still figuring out how I feel about AI and its role in the world. So I'm kind of just, it's a stand back sort of thing. I'm just kind of waiting to see how I feel, and then I'll come forward with something if I want to do something. I lost my train of thought, but that was more or less it. I guess one closing remark I would like to make, and it's off kind of what you said, Allie, around like creativity is human domain, more or less. At the end of the day, in my point of view, AI can never replace what we're doing, because at the end of the day, we do create things to connect with each other. So the difference between someone, getting inspiration and creating something and wanting to share it, the reason the desire for someone else to read that is it's a human connection. It's sharing our psyche with each other. It's sharing our worlds with each other, and it's sharing something. It's a conversation we had with ourselves that someone else was interested to read. And the difference, contrast that with someone pumping out a bunch of material to make $10 off of 30 minutes of work. That's not a human connection. That's someone that wanted to make money. And there's a distinct priceless appeal between the two. And that can never actually be replaced. So at the end of the day, it's just, keep in mind what is important and keep in mind what just what we're looking for, and everything's fine.
That was beautifully said, Phoenix. Were you reading that from a screen? Because that was like, ooh, like a human tear rolling down my human cheek.
That was AI generated.
No, I'm really glad
No,
you
that was
said
not AI generated.
That'd be so sad.
Because I'll keep this brief, but I'm working on a screenplay at the moment that's an adaptation of a short story that was written over 100 years ago, and I'm doing a modern interpretation of it. And I was getting a bit stuck on a scene I literally needed to write today, so I went back to the source material to kind of get inspired. So it's a public domain piece because it's and I was reading the dialogue, and I'm like, I can take this dialogue, feed it into my adaptation. It's kind of the art of the adaptation and finding my own take, but knowing these words existed from another artist 100 years ago, and how to handle those words that had been given to us, and then funnel through me and then put out into the world. And that is about that human, that sharing. It is how we will preserve and celebrate culture. It is how we create human empathy and walk in other people's shoes. Is almost for me the most important reason of why we tell story and consume story. So I don't think I would have that same warm and fuzzy feeling I had today with my adaptation if I knew the material I was processing to then put out into the world. Like, could I be inspired by something that's computer driven? There seemed like such a fundamental part of what was inspiring me to write was that I knew someone had written this 100 years ago. So this is me just saying, yes, Phoenix, well done. That was lovely.
The difference between generating content and writing poetry, it's not about like how long did it take you to put the words on the page. It's I had a feeling and I just wanted to write it down. And I don't know.
Well said.
From there, we'll close with a quote. Paddy, I think you have a quote for us today.
I don't have a quote so much as the machine overlord has a quote. Before we started, I typed into chat GTP, hello, could you please, I say hello to robots. Hello, could you please create a quote for us about AI written in a literary form? And this is what it came up with, and I kind of want to throw into my lap when reading it. It's a little reassuring, I think. Well, make up your own mind. In the realm of ones and zeros, where electrons dance in binary ballet, artificial intelligence emerges as the modern Prometheus, breathing life into the machinery of our imaginations, a digital muse inspiring the poetry of progress. And that's just the most corporate video thing I've ever read. So AI does that well.
Bit like, calm down.
It's like an insurance ad.
You'll be like, I've got notes.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, ChatGPT.
Thank you, ChatGPT. That's gonna do it for us today. And then Ali, we do have an audiobook coming up. But Ali, do you want to talk about that really quick?
Yes, an audiobook recorded by real humans coming out. Coming soon. We don't have a date for you yet, but it is exciting that the new Mythic audiobook is fully recorded. I have a husband downstairs who's putting the final checks on the final files as we speak. That one's going to be coming out on Audible, so you'll be able to find that very, very soon. And we can't wait to be in your ear holes even more than we already are.
Yeah. And we do have the legendary Rupert Degas, who, if you've ever listened to The Name of the Wind on audiobook, which is so good. This guy, he's probably one of the best I've ever heard, and we've managed to get him on our audiobook reading one of our stories. So if you know that guy or you're interested, check our audiobook and listen to some of his beautiful, beautiful work on the Stolen Sword. It's really something.
Yeah. No, Rupert Degas as well as and we have it's a whole cast of very talented voice actors and actresses. oh my gosh, like there have been moments where I've been like, I could do voice acting, and then I hear people like this, I'm like, oh, it's like a whole art, isn't it? Like it's a whole skill. That's there's mine, and then there's this is a whole other level.
I love that we're fangirling over the audiobook because we've invited these other creatives into our work, and now we get to experience it at that slightly distancing level, and we're like, oh my god, that's so cool.
Yeah, it is.
Well, thank you for listening to Pros and Cons yet again, and yeah, we'll talk to you next time. That's gonna do it. See you later.
See you next week.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.